The battlefield shook with the roar of alien war drums as dust rose into the blood-red sky. Kieran, a human soldier stranded far from his unit, watched the chaos unfold from behind the remains of a shattered wall. He had seen countless battles before, but nothing like this. The air itself felt heavy with the scent of iron and burning oil. In the middle of it all, he spotted her, a tall alien warrior woman, her dark armor cracked, her shield splintered, yet her eyes burned with defiance. She was surrounded by enemies from her own kind, soldiers with cruel masks and curved blades. Her tail lashed behind her, her movements slowing as exhaustion gripped her. The shield in her hands was no longer a defense, it was a weight dragging her down. Kieran did not know her name, her rank, or even why she fought alone, but something inside him told him that if she fell, something far worse would follow. Arrows clattered around her as she dropped to one knee. The enemy tightened their circle, stepping over bodies without hesitation. Kieran's heart pounded in his chest. He could turn away, find shelter, wait for the fighting to pass. But the thought of her being cut down where she stood made his muscles move before his mind could stop them. He sprinted into the open, the sound of his boots slamming against the cracked stone. Every alien head turned. A shout echoed from somewhere, but Kieran didn't care. He reached her side just as a blade came down. His arms snapped up, catching the strike with his own weapon, sparks flying between them. She looked at him with wide eyes, her breathing ragged, blood streaking her cheek, yet her voice was steady when she spoke. "You're not one of us." "Why are you here?" she demanded. Kieran grabbed the broken shield from her hand and raised it high, deflecting another attack. "Because I don't leave people to die," he replied. His words were sharp, but his voice carried a weight that made her hesitate. In her world, mercy was weakness. In his, it was the reason to fight. The enemy lunged again, but now they faced two. Kieran's strikes were precise, honed from years of survival. She fought beside him, her movements regaining speed, as if his presence pulled her back from the edge. For a moment, their enemies faltered, unsure why a human would fight to protect one of their own kind. In that hesitation, Kieran and the alien woman cut through the nearest attackers, forcing the rest to retreat a few steps. Breathing hard, she looked at the shield in his hand, now splintered even further from the blows. "It's useless now," she said quietly. But Kieran shook his head and pressed it back into her grip. "It's yours. You might need it again," he said. She stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. For her people, to give or return a weapon in battle was not a small thing. It was a bond, a promise of allegiance that could not be broken without shame. More enemies were regrouping in the distance, but something had shifted. She stood taller now, her tail curling with renewed energy, and the faintest trace of a smirk touched her lips. Kieran didn't know it yet, but in her culture, saving her life in such a way came with a price. Not one paid in coin or favor, but in something far more personal. And she had already decided that the human beside her would be bound to that custom, whether he understood it or not. Kieran had no time to question why the alien woman now stood so close to him. The enemy's second wave came charging, their boots pounding against the ground in unison. Sparks of weapon fire lit the air, and the ringing clash of steel echoed across the battlefield. Kieran moved without hesitation, blocking strikes meant for her while she struck down anyone who dared to get near. Together, they carved a small space in the chaos, a circle of survival surrounded by death. Her breathing was steady now, but her eyes never left him. Each time his sword intercepted a blow aimed at her, something in her gaze sharpened. Kieran didn't notice it yet, but she was measuring him, as if deciding whether he was worthy of something he didn't know existed. She fought with a grace that spoke of years of training, yet her style was different from the others of her kind. She adapted quickly to his moves, her strikes aligning with his in perfect rhythm, When the final soldier in their reach fell, they both turned toward the next group preparing to attack. Before they could advance, a horn sounded in the distance. The enemy stopped, their leader raising a clawed hand. Without a word, they pulled back, vanishing into the smoke. Kieran kept his weapon raised until the last shadow disappeared. Only then did he lower it, his chest rising and falling with the weight of exhaustion. The alien woman watched him silently, her tail curling in a way that felt both dangerous and curious. "You fight like one of us," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but there was a strange weight to it. "And yet, you're not one of us. Why risk your life for mine?" Kieran met her gaze, unsure how to answer without sounding like a fool. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. That answer seemed to puzzle her more than anything. Her people valued strength above all else, not kindness or morality. To them, saving someone without gaining power from it was unthinkable. She stepped closer, placing the broken shield back into his hands. "You gave this to me when you could have kept it. That is not a small act. Among my kind, such a gesture binds you to a custom you do not yet understand." Kieran frowned. "Custom?" he asked, but she only tilted her head, as if deciding whether to explain. Then, without warning, she turned and started walking toward the ruins ahead. "Follow me," she commanded. Her tone left no room for refusal. They moved through the wreckage of what had once been a fortified camp. Burned banners lay torn across the ground, and the smell of smoke lingered heavy in the air. Kieran kept his eyes on her, noting how the warriors in the shadows moved aside as she passed. Whoever she was, her presence carried authority. When they reached a cracked stone archway, she stopped and faced him again. "My name is Vera," she said. "By our law, you have claimed the right to stand at my side until death. You are now my chosen." Kieran stared at her in disbelief, trying to make sense of her words. "You mean I just signed up for something without knowing it?" he asked. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You saved my life and returned my shield. That act, under our customs, means you have taken responsibility for my survival, as I have for yours. It is unbreakable. To refuse is dishonor. To accept is to become part of my fate." Kieran felt a chill crawl down his spine. He had come to help her on instinct, not knowing it would bind him to something he didn't understand. But looking into her fierce eyes, he sensed refusing was not an option. In the distance, the enemy horn sounded again, this time deeper and slower. Vera's expression hardened, and she turned her gaze toward the smoke on the horizon. "They are regrouping," she said. "If they return, we will face more than soldiers. We will face their champions." Kieran gripped his weapon tighter. Whatever strange custom he had walked into, it was now too late to walk away. Beside him, Vera's presence felt like both a promise and a warning. And as the shadows of the approaching enemy grew darker, he knew this battle was far from over. The wind carried the low rumble of distant drums, a sound that seemed to seep into Kieran's bones. He followed Vera through the ruins, each step echoing against the cracked stone beneath their feet. Around them, her warriors moved silently, their armor glinting under the strange light of the twin moons. None of them spoke to him, but their eyes lingered on the human who now walked beside their leader. Kieran could not tell if it was respect or suspicion he saw in their stares. Vera led him into a chamber that had survived the battle better than most. The walls were lined with banners marked in her people's script, and a fire burned in the center, casting long shadows. She gestured for him to sit, and when he did, two warriors entered carrying a chest of blackened steel. They set it before her and left without a word. Vera opened it, revealing pieces of intricately crafted armor, each etched with swirling golden patterns. She began to fasten them over her own battle-worn gear, the new plates fitting as if made for her alone. Kieran watched in silence, noting the way her movements were both deliberate and unhurried. When she caught him staring, she paused, her red eyes locking on his. "You will need to understand something before the next battle," she said. "The champions who come for us are not like the soldiers you faced. They will not break easily, and they will not stop until one of us is dead." Her words were blunt, but there was no fear in her voice. Instead, there was a quiet certainty that made him straighten his back. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Then tell me what I need to know." Vera nodded and reached into the chest, pulling out a short blade unlike anything he had seen. Its edge shimmered faintly, and strange runes pulsed along its length. She held it out to him. "This is not given to outsiders," she said. "But you are not an outsider anymore. By our custom, my chosen must be armed as I am." Kieran took the weapon carefully, feeling its weight, the balance perfect in his hand. As his fingers closed around the hilt, the runes flared brighter. He felt a strange warmth travel up his arm, like the blade itself was recognizing him. "What is it made of?" he asked. Vera's lips curved slightly. "The metal comes from the bones of a fallen star. It cuts through the strongest armor and never dulls. If you wield it, you must be ready to kill without hesitation." Kieran looked at her, then down at the blade. He wasn't sure if he could match her cold resolve, but he knew he had already chosen his path when he stepped into that battlefield. Outside, a horn sounded again, closer this time. Vera rose to her feet, fastening the last of her new armor into place. "They are coming," she said. "And they will not stop at me. They will kill everyone who stands in their way, including you." Kieran stood as well, sliding the blade into his belt. His pulse quickened, but there was no room left for doubt. He had bound himself to her fate, whether by accident or instinct, and there was no turning back now. When they stepped outside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of marching feet. Across the field, the enemy's champions emerged from the haze, towering figures in armor so dark it seemed to swallow the light. Each carried weapons that pulsed with an eerie glow, and their presence alone made the warriors around Vera shift uneasily. She looked at Kieran, her voice steady. "Stay close to me. Strike when I strike. If we separate, we die." Kieran nodded once, his jaw set. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The champions halted just beyond bow range, their leader stepping forward. His helmet was shaped like a snarling beast, and his voice was a low growl as he spoke in a language Kieran didn't understand. Vera answered in the same tongue, her words sharp and unyielding. The leader's response was a single gesture, raising his weapon high before pointing it directly at her. The meaning was clear enough. The battle would begin again, and this time, only one side would leave the field alive. Asterisk. The silence before the charge was thick enough to feel in the air. Kieran's grip on the strange alien blade tightened, the warmth of its metal seeping into his skin. Across the field, the enemy champions stood unmoving, their eyes glowing faintly from within their helmets. The way they held their weapons made it clear that they had done this many times before. Each one radiated a kind of calm menace that made the lesser soldiers step back instinctively. Vera shifted her stance, lowering her center of gravity and angling her shield toward the enemy leader. Her tail moved in slow arcs behind her, a sign of focus rather than restlessness. Without looking at Kieran, she spoke in a voice that carried over the sound of the wind. "When they break formation, they will try to separate us. Do not let them." He nodded silently, his heart thudding in his chest. This was not going to be a battle of numbers, but of skill, and every strike would count. The leader roared, raising his weapon skyward. The champions charged forward in unison, their heavy boots shaking the ground. Vera moved first, sprinting to meet them with a speed that seemed impossible for her armor's weight. Kieran followed, the cold air biting at his face as he closed the distance. The first clash was deafening, metal against metal, sparks flying, the impact vibrating through his arms. One champion swung a massive axe at him, but Kieran ducked low, driving his blade into the gap under the armor. The runes flared, and the champion fell. Vera was a whirlwind beside him, her shield deflecting blow after blow, her strikes precise and lethal. She fought with an intensity that drew the enemy's attention, giving Kieran moments to strike from their blind sides. But the champions were relentless, and for everyone they brought down, another pressed forward. Kieran felt the ache in his arms grow, but there was no space for rest. Every time he risked a glance at Vera, she was still moving, still holding her ground like an unshakable pillar. One of the champions managed to drive Kieran back several steps, forcing him toward the ruins. He stumbled but caught himself, blocking a downward strike just in time. The alien blade sang through the air as he countered, slicing through the champion's weapon and cutting deep into their chest plate. The figure fell, but Kieran barely had time to breathe before another took its place. Somewhere in the chaos he heard Vera call his name, not in fear, but as a command to regroup. He moved toward her, cutting down 2 more attackers along the way. When they stood side by side again, she met his eyes for a brief second. "You fight like you have done this before," she said between breaths, "but not against these." He smirked faintly despite the danger. "Guess I'm a fast learner." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but the corner of her mouth lifted as if she approved. Then another wave crashed into them, and there was no more time for words. The enemy leader finally stepped into the fray, his movements faster than his size should allow. His weapon was a long, jagged blade that crackled with some kind of dark energy. Every strike from it sent shockwaves through the ground. Vera blocked one blow with her shield, but the force sent her skidding back. Kieran darted in to slash at the leader's side, but the man turned with impossible speed, parrying the strike and shoving him back with a kick that knocked the air from his lungs. Pain shot through Kieran's ribs, but he forced himself upright. Vera had already recovered and was pressing the attack, her movements sharper than before. Together, they drove the leader back a few steps, forcing him to defend against a barrage of strikes from both sides. Yet there was something in the way he fought that told Kieran this was far from over. Every block, every retreat, felt deliberate, as if he was testing them, learning their rhythms, waiting for the perfect moment to end it. Then, with a sudden shift in his stance, the leader slammed his weapon into the ground, sending a burst of energy outward. The shockwave threw both Kieran and Vera off their feet, their weapons scattering across the dirt. As Kieran struggled to rise, he saw the leader advancing toward Vera, his blade raised for the final strike. Without thinking, Kieran threw himself between them, his body braced against the blow. Steel met steel, the impact ringing out across the battlefield, and in that moment, he knew there would be no retreat from what came next. The leader's strike pressed down with a force that made Kieran's arms tremble. His boots dug into the dirt, his muscles straining as the jagged blade ground against his own. The sound was like grinding stone, sharp and grating in his ears. His vision blurred for a second, but he forced his focus to stay on the enemy in front of him. If he faltered even once, Vera would fall before she could stand again. Vera pushed herself up from the ground and charged at the leader from the side. Her shield slammed into his ribs, forcing him to step back and giving Kieran a moment to breathe. The two of them attacked together, their movements quick and coordinated. For the first time, the leader stumbled, his footing shifting under the combined force. Yet even in retreat, his eyes glowed with cold calculation. He was still waiting for something, though neither of them could see what it was. One of the remaining champions broke through the chaos to join the fight, swinging a massive hammer at Kieran's head. He ducked, feeling the wind of the strike. Passed just above him, then countered with a swift cut to the champion's leg. The alien fell to one knee, but before Kieran could finish him, the leader lashed out with a brutal kick that sent Kieran sprawling across the dirt. His blade skidded away, and his chest burned with each breath. The leader's attention shifted instantly to Vera. She met him head-on, her shield intercepting blow after blow. Sparks lit the air with every strike, and the ground beneath them cracked from the force. Kieran forced himself up, ignoring the sharp pain in his side. He dove for his blade, the runes flaring to life as soon as his fingers touched the hilt. With a burst of speed, he closed the distance and struck at the leader's back. The blow connected, but the armor absorbed most of the damage. Still, it was enough to make the leader snarl and turn his fury toward Kieran. The next exchange was a blur of strikes and parries. The leader's weapon moved like a storm, each swing heavy enough to shatter bone. Kieran deflected one, barely sidestepped another, then found an opening and drove his blade into the gap at the leader's hip. The runes burned brighter, and this time the leader staggered, his footing faltering. Vera seized the moment, smashing her shield into his helmet and sending him crashing to the ground. For a moment, the battlefield stilled as everyone watched him struggle to rise. The other champions hesitated, looking between their fallen leader and the two warriors standing over him. Vera's voice rang out, strong and commanding. She spoke. In her language, her words sharp as steel. Whatever she said made several of the enemy lower their weapons. But the leader, bleeding and furious, forced himself to his feet. His blade trembled in his grip, but his eyes burned brighter than before. Kieran knew this fight was far from over. With a roar, the leader lunged forward, moving faster than his wounds should have allowed. He ignored Vera completely, driving all his focus toward Kieran. The jagged blade came down in a brutal arc, and Kieran met it with his own. The clash sent a shockwave through his arms, but he held his ground. The two locked eyes, neither willing to yield. Vera came in from the side, her shield smashing into the leader's knees, finally bringing him down. Kieran didn't hesitate. He drove his blade into the leader's chest, the runes flaring one last time before the body went still. The moment the leader fell, the battlefield erupted into chaos. Some of the enemy fled instantly, others dropped their weapons in surrender. Vera's warriors surged forward to drive them away, but she stayed beside Kieran, her eyes fixed on him. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You fought as my equal," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the weight of her words was undeniable. Among her kind, such recognition was not given lightly. Kieran, still catching his breath, nodded in acknowledgement. "We're not done yet, are we?" he asked. Vera's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where dark shapes were beginning to gather. Again, "No," she said. "This was only the first step. They will come for us again, and next time, they will not underestimate you." She lifted her broken shield, the one he had raised for her in the beginning, and held it out to him. "From this moment, we are bound not just by custom, but by battle." The battlefield was silent, except for the sound of distant retreating footsteps. Kieran stood with his blade still in hand, the runes faintly glowing in the dim light. Vera's warriors moved around them, checking the fallen and tending to the wounded. The air smelled of smoke, blood, and cold iron. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, not just from her people, but from those who had fought against him and survived. He was no longer just a stranger in their war. He was something else. Now Vera stepped closer, her armor scratched and dented, but her stance still unshaken. She spoke to her warriors in their language, giving orders that made them scatter into the ruins. When she turned back to Kieran, her expression was unreadable. "You carry yourself differently now," she said. "Not as one who came to help, but as one who belongs here." Kieran shook his head slightly. "I didn't come here to belong. I came here to survive, and to make sure you did too." Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer before she nodded. They began walking toward the inner fortress that still stood behind the wreckage. The walls were tall and marked with the scars of past battles. Inside, the air was cooler, the sounds of war muffled by thick stone. Warriors bowed their heads slightly as Vera passed, but their eyes stayed fixed on Kieran. It was not open hostility, but it was not full acceptance either. He was still being measured, weighed in a way that only time and more battles could resolve. In the center of the fortress was a great hall lined with carved pillars. At its far end stood a long table covered with maps, weapons, and strange crystalline devices. Vera gestured for Kieran to stand beside her as she addressed her captains. She spoke of the battle they had just fought, the death of the enemy leader, and the fact that their enemies would soon return in greater numbers. Her voice carried authority, but it also carried a quiet challenge, one aimed at the captains who glanced toward Kieran when she spoke of victory. When the meeting ended, the captains filed out without a word. Vera remained at the table, tracing a line on the map with one clawed finger. "They will come through here," she said, pointing to a narrow valley marked in deep red. "It is the only path large enough for their army. We will meet them before they can spread out." Kieran studied the map. "That means you'll be fighting them in tight space. Good for defense, but bad if they break your line." She gave a small smile. "Which is why you will hold the center with me." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "You trust me with that already?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I trust the one who took down their leader at my side. That is more than enough." Her words were firm, but they carried a weight beyond strategy. It was as if she was reminding him that their bond was no longer just about the broken shield. It was about what they had become to each other through battle. Kieran said nothing, but his grip on the table's edge tightened. Night fell over the fortress. Fires burned in braziers along the walls, casting shifting shadows across the stone. Kieran sat alone in a corner of the courtyard, sharpening the alien blade. Its runes pulsed faintly with each stroke. He thought of Earth, of his unit, of the life he had before this war. It felt distant now, almost unreal. Vera appeared silently beside him, sitting without a word. After a long moment, she spoke. "When I first saw you, I thought you would die within minutes. Now I see you differently." Her eyes held his, and there was no mockery in them. She reached out, placing the broken shield across his lap. "This is still yours," she said. "Not because you gave it to me, but because you proved yourself worthy to bear it." Kieran looked down at the splintered wood and battered metal. It was a poor defense now, but it carried a meaning he was only beginning to understand. He nodded once, the weight of the moment settling in. "Then I'll carry it until it breaks completely," he said. Vera's lips curved slightly, a rare softness in her expression. In the distance, a horn sounded a slow, deep call that echoed through the valley. Vera stood immediately, her voice sharp as she called for her warriors. Kieran rose beside her, sliding the blade into his belt and slinging the shield across his back. The sound of marching feet began to build beyond the walls. The enemy had returned, and this time, they would not come to test them. They had come to end them. The horn's echo faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of marching feet. Kieran stood at the fortress gate beside Vera, the cold wind pulling at his hair. Torches burned along the walls, their light catching the edges of armor and weapons. Every warrior was in position, shields locked and eyes fixed on the dark valley ahead. The air was tight with anticipation, the kind that pressed against the chest and slowed every breath. Vera's voice cut through the silence, giving orders in her language. Her tone was sharp, but it carried a confidence that steadied the warriors. Around her, she turned to Kieran and spoke in his tongue. "When they breach the line, we will not fall back. The center holds, or we all die." Kieran met her eyes and nodded once. He felt the weight of her trust like armor heavier than anything he had worn before. This was no longer about surviving the night. This was about standing unbroken beside her. Shadows moved in the distance, growing larger with each passing second. Then the enemy emerged, row after row of armored soldiers, their banners whipping in the wind. At the center marched their new leader, taller than the rest, his weapon a massive blade of black steel. His armor gleamed with the light of the torches, and each step he took was deliberate, as if he wanted every defender to feel the ground shake beneath him. The enemy ranks advanced without hurry, certain of their strength. The first impact came like a crash of thunder. Shields rattled, weapons scraped, and the line shuddered under the force. Kieran's blade moved instinctively, blocking a strike aimed at the warrior beside him. Vera fought only a few steps away, her broken shield raised high, her strikes precise and deadly. They moved in rhythm, covering each other's blind spots without speaking. Every blow Kieran struck felt heavier, every defense stronger. Because she was still there fighting beside him, the enemy pressed harder, their sheer numbers threatening to break the line. Kieran drove his blade into one opponent's chest, then pivoted to block another. A spear scraped across his arm, cutting through the fabric, but not deep enough to slow him. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, knowing that if he faltered, the gap would swallow them all. Vera's voice rang out again, calling for her warriors to tighten the formation. The command held them together, and the center line steadied. Then the enemy leader stepped into the fight. He moved with speed that defied his size, his black steel blade cutting through shields as if they were paper. Each strike sent defenders staggering back. When he swung at Kieran, the impact nearly tore the alien blade from his hands. Pain shot through his arms, but he forced his grip tighter. The leader pressed forward, striking again and again, his eyes locked on Kieran as though he had been seeking him from the start. Vera came between them, her shield absorbing the next blow. The wood splintered under the force, but she did not yield. She slammed her shoulder into the leader, knocking him off balance just long enough for Kieran to strike. His blade cut into the joint of the leader's armor, sparks flying as the runes blazed to life. The leader roared and swung wildly, but Kieran ducked under the strike and drove forward again, forcing him back toward the edge of the line. Around them, the battle raged in a storm of steel and shouting. The defenders began to push forward, step by step, their unity breaking the enemy's momentum. Kieran could feel the shift in the fight, the way fear began to creep into the enemy's movements. But the leader was not finished. With a sudden surge, he knocked both Kieran and Vera aside, clearing space for himself. He lifted his blade high, the torchlight running along its black edge, and advanced with grim purpose toward the heart of the defense. Kieran pulled himself up, blood on his lip and fire in his chest. Vera was already standing, her shield cracked, nearly in half but still in her grip. They exchanged a single glance, no words needed. They charged together, one last push to meet the leader before he could cut the line in two. The clash was like the strike of a hammer on stone, the sound echoing through the valley. In that instant, Kieran knew the next moments would decide everything. The clash between Kieran and the enemy leader sent shockwaves through the line. Sparks burst from the meeting of their blades, and the roar of the surrounding battle faded into a distant hum. Every strike from the leader carried the weight of a falling mountain, but Kieran met each one with a force born not only from strength, but from sheer will. His arms burned, his breath came fast, yet he refused to give in. Vera moved around them, looking for the opening that would end it. Her shield, though cracked, still deflected strikes from enemy soldiers who tried to interfere. Kieran's focus never wavered, his eyes locked on the leader's movements. The man's speed was unnatural, each step calculated to push Kieran further off balance. But Kieran had fought in worse odds before. He had learned that sometimes survival meant enduring long enough for your enemy to make the first mistake. That mistake came when the leader committed to a heavy overhead strike. Kieran stepped inside the arc of the swing, bringing his blade up in a sharp angle that caught the man's wrist. The runes flared blindingly, and the leader's weapon slipped from his grip. Before he could recover, Vera was there, driving her shield into his chest and sending him staggering back. Kieran followed with a deep slash to the exposed side of his armor, cutting through with a sound like tearing metal. The leader dropped to one knee, his breaths coming in ragged bursts. Around them, the enemy faltered, their advance slowing as they watched their commander falter. Vera stood over him, her weapon raised for the final blow. She looked to Kieran, her eyes searching his. In that silent exchange, he understood. This kill was hers by right, but she was offering it to him. He shook his head once, a silent refusal, and stepped back. She nodded and ended it swiftly. When the leader fell, the sound that followed was not a cheer but a wave of retreat. The enemy broke apart, their discipline shattering without their commander's presence. Vera's warriors surged forward, pushing them out of the valley and into the shadows beyond. The battle was over, but the air still trembled with the echoes of what had been fought here. Kieran stood in the center of it all, his blade still glowing faintly in the torchlight. Vera approached him slowly, the broken shield now nothing more than splintered wood and twisted metal in her hand. She held it out to him, her gaze steady. "It is finished," she said. "By custom, you are bound to me until the day one of us falls. But after this day, you are more than my chosen. You are my equal." Kieran took the shield, feeling the weight of her words more than the weight of the object itself. The surviving warriors gathered around, forming a loose circle. Many bowed their heads in respect. Others simply watched in silence. Kieran could feel the shift in their eyes. He was no longer just the human who had interfered in their fight. He was now part of their story, a name that would be spoken long after the fires of this war had gone cold. For the first time, he understood that the bond Vera spoke of was not just about obligation. It was about trust earned in the heat of battle. They walked together back toward the fortress, the first light of dawn breaking over the ridges. The valley below was littered with the signs of war, but the ground they had held still belonged to them. Vera's steps were steady despite her injuries, and Kieran matched her pace. Neither spoke for a long while. There was no need. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the unspoken truth that they had fought and survived together, and that survival had changed them both. At the gates, Vera stopped and looked out over the land beyond. "There will be other battles," she said. "Other leaders who think they can take what we have. But they will learn what we have shown today." Kieran followed her gaze, the sun's light catching on the edge of his blade. He felt the truth in her words, as unshakable as the walls behind them. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. And for him, there was no longer any question of walking away.